let me say it's a great pleasure to be here. It's the second time I have come to Sofia, and I hope tomorrow to have a little bit of time to look around. Thank you very much for the very kind words of introduction. Thank you also for the comments on the book. Professor Stefano, I think has read the book more carefully than I read it myself, so that's very kind. Let me say, I and some other authors of the book, we have been traveling around Europe quite a lot, and I've presented the book in Berlin, in Paris, in Brussels, even in Moscow, and unfortunately the problem is a little bit like Professor Khrushchev explained. It's not just in Bulgaria that the ideas here are minority ideas, right? And the neoliberal ideas are quite dominant. That is in all these places. That China was mentioned just before. I haven't been to Beijing, but in I think 2 weeks a delegation will come from China, and I, amongst others, will be talking to them, coming to Brussels, and perhaps they will be more receptive. That was what you were suggesting. A couple of remarks. Well, the first is that this report was initially conceived at a time when we were pessimistic about the state of the economy, but optimistic about the political climate, where we thought there was an opportunity for a new agenda, and as the colleagues have said, this seems now to be perhaps not so topical. So if you look at the book now, you may get a sense of that. The second thing I should say is I am not going to speak too much about the euro area crisis. I've written a lot about the euro area crisis, particularly on the Social Europe website, which the two professors were kind enough to mention. There is also an event tomorrow in the afternoon, and I will focus then more on the euro area crisis. So this is a more general presentation about growth models, which I hope is relevant in Bulgaria and in Moscow, and I don't know about Beijing, but in Berlin and the UK and almost everywhere. So this is just an overview. I want to stress that this book is not so much an analysis of the crisis. I and some of the other colleagues have written more detailed analyses of the crisis. This is more about a vision, if you like, a vision of a different growth model. And I will run through some of these points here. Here you just have the book. At the end I have the address from which you can download it. There is, Grigo may say a word perhaps later about, there is a Russian translation in preparation. I know that's quite close to Bulgarian, so it may be easier for some of you to read it in Russian. And also a French translation, and I know some colleagues prefer speaking French or reading it in French. So I hope this is very small. So these were sorry, I lost the title. There should be a title here: Goals of the publication. So we wanted to put forward alternatives. We wanted to have that as a basis to engage with policymakers, with a sort of neoliberal policymakers, and also people from the media was mentioned, and show that the labour movement has some ideas, has some alternatives to offer. I don't know what it's like in Bulgaria and Romania, but in Western Europe, you know, the trade unions are often portrayed as just saying no, you know, just blocking change in society, and the aim was to show that there is some alternatives around the labour movement, and also that there is a link between, you know, the paper's written by, the book is written jointly by some colleagues who are trade union leaders and trade union officials, and some colleagues, of course most famously Joseph Stiglitz, who are, let's say, progressive academics, progressive economists. So that was also an aim to show, you know, if you like, an alliance between these two forces. Okay, I won't give a detailed interpretation of the causes of the crisis, but very briefly, some points are perhaps important, particularly now in an environment where, certainly in Europe, you know, we are being told that the crisis is a fiscal crisis. Right? It's all about governments. It's all about too much spending, too little resources, and you know, the case of Greece is portrayed as typical of all the countries, which is not the case. So it's important to be clear about, even in a brief way, about some of the important causes of the crisis. So I would mention global imbalances. These are particularly the current account surpluses in China and Japan and Germany and some other European countries, and the large deficits that were run up by particularly the US, Great Britain, Ireland, and the southern countries of the Euro area. And in our analysis, this has a lot to do with inequality. Why is that? Well, that's a long story, but essentially the increase of inequality led to a structural depression of the growth of demand in the economy, and that had a number of effects. One was low interest rates, which were an attempt to maintain growth rates, and the other was that countries who lacked the purchasing power of their own working households had recourse to two solutions. One was exports. So this was the strategy of China and Germany, notably, was to get the demand from the export side. And the other was debt. Right? So this was the strategy of the US and let's say the UK, also Spain, and countries like that. So you had a symbiosis of these two growth strategies, which fed on each other, and for some time where it worked. But well, Marx was mentioned. I'm not a great expert on Marx, but the famous contradictions in Marx analysis. I mean, this was a case of a contradiction, you know, which at some point you know, could no longer be deniable, and this was essentially how the crisis